My message today is that the future is something you cannot let happen. It's no longer spectator sport. It means basically you have to get involved in some meaningful format. Some of the slideshows, there are no underage children here, so you won't be shocked too much. Some of the slides are a little bit politically inconsiderate and politically incorrect, so you have been warned. I am Khannea Suntzu. I'm a blogger primarily. I'm an activist, politically activist. Behind the scenes I do a lot of things that should not be mentioned here, and they have their consequences. Right now, we don't live in a normal democracy anymore. I don't have anything here. Oh, I got it. So, my second slide. Never mind. My second slide. The first part of my slide is going to be describing the situation as it is right now and the pathologies of the situation worldwide as it is right now. A lot of things will overlap. There will be a lot of complex overlapping and sometimes contradictory statements in my message, but I think you will be able to parse it. First problem is our leaders. We assume that leaders are something we choose. We have democracy, or at least in name, in spirit, we have some sort of democratic system worldwide. Most countries claim to be democratic. Yet, for some reason, since the 1980s, and you might remember part of the graph that Martin Ford showed us, something happened in the 1970s. Our efficiency as a society kept creeping up, and wages disconnected. And ever since that, and especially the Thatcher Reagan era, there's something happening with our leaders that we can't fully parse. But somehow we keep electing leaders, and we hope that they will make the best choices that benefit us all. But our leaders, they are increasingly acting as if the society we're in is in some sort of a fire sale. They're breaking our society. Clearly, there is an element that the concentration of wealth is happening at the top. Well, simple translation, Citizens United. Some of you may have heard of what's happening in America. Right now, money is increasingly influencing politics. There's a good presentation about this process, and it describes the country as, especially the United States, but the same thing is happening here in Europe as well, is that there is a pre-selection in leadership. The first stage is, of course, generated by money, and the second stage is, well, token democratic. We still choose amongst a small selection of leaders where we have pre-selected. Leicesters, the election system of Leicesters, you should look it up online. The problem with this is that we get a pre-cooked democratic system, and the leaders favor, well, of course, campaign contributions. So it is money paying the first selection, the first cycle of selection of our leadership, and they sure are acting like it. There has always been a great hope. As much as we've been alive in the part of the century where we all have been alive, there has always been a great hope that while things get better, things get worse, and arguably a lot of things in the world are getting worse, technology will somehow compensate for this. So, a prime example is, often quoted example is peak oil. Peak oil is the moment where oil becomes basically unaffordable for industrial or economic processes. And advocates of advanced science or accelerating progress often claim, well, there will be a solution for people. Well, history showed us in a more modest scale that this isn't the case. Once there is disparity and technology comes along that changes the rules, invariably, you can watch at many examples from history before the Industrial Revolution, but increasingly so since the Industrial Revolution, that the consequence of accelerating technology is disparity. This is a scene from the movie Elysium, and it is the most grisly scene that it could take. It is technology, advanced technology that allows us to do incredible things used at a favela level. And that is generally the result of extreme disparity, consequence extreme poverty, paired with technology. It creates black markets, it creates crime, it creates ultra-violence, and generally it does not compensate equally. So scarcity plus advancing technology, the conclusion is not compensation. It's not a cure-all. Technological revolutions create winners and losers. So we live in an uncommon era. We live in an era where we We only know what we know from our own life, from our own perspective, from our own historical constraints. So we think all this is normal. We all think that the world we're in right now is a normal world, but it isn't. If you would take someone from the past, someone well educated from before the Industrial Revolution, the world would be completely surreal. So the brief historical era we're in, where we enjoyed democracy, where we enjoyed prosperity, where we enjoyed the constraint of the relative freedom of the 20th century, is just a very tiny historical reference frame. It may have been actually an accident. What if the culture we're in right now is the result of abundance, is the result of enormous technological advances, is the result of, well, pretty good bartering value for workers. Workers were able to barter very high wages, but also we live in a period, the Cold War was a negotiation phase between communism and capitalism. What if certain capitalists were very concerned about the whole world turning communism, and they briefly allowed, that's conspiracy thinking, I agree, but they briefly allowed a higher standard of living. So we may live in a brief historical period where there was human value, where there was human negotiation value. Mind you, those historical periods were not unique. They happened after the plague as well, but wages were very high. When more people in Europe died, wages were briefly very high for a generation. The same thing may have happened in the 20th century. That meaning, the consequence of this may end. The picture, who of you aware is of the deplorable working conditions in some part of China, where people literally jump off the buildings rather than work there? They have to surround those buildings with suicide nets. I think it's a sign of things to come. Working conditions that are so horrible and so underappreciated that people just don't want to live anymore under those conditions. Democracy itself, and there comes the next point. This is a scene from Robocop. I generally work in narratives and I generally work in examples from fiction. Robocop was produced by a company called OCP in the movie, and in the movie he serves the public, he serves the law, and he is, well, the perfect cop. But there is a prime directive. There's a programmed directive in Robocop. Directive 4 is you serve OCP if there's a conflict of interest. And that is the democracy we're in. We're in a democracy which is condoned by certain elites, banking elites, industrial elites. Once democracy stops serving its purpose, well, it is rescinded, it is dismantled. This is happening right now, arguably. If you look at what America is doing right now, and America is definitely a prime example of this process, there is almost as if there's a process of dismantling, intentional dismantling of the democratic rights we have. But also, if we look at market mechanisms right now, the precious system of capitalism, it doesn't always produce the desirable results. A very problematic aspect of capitalism is it functions as an evolutionary constraint. Capitalism establishes rules, and many of those rules are pathological. If you look at corporate culture right now, it favors people that are maximized in their ruthlessness, definitely in the banking sector. The prime example is Richard Food. May I quote him? What I want to do is reach into their bodies, rip out their hearts, and eat in front of them before they die. The good thing there are then children here. Because this guy said it during a meeting, a Wall Street broker meeting, when he was describing certain people that broke his corporate rules. This is endemic of the kind of corporate practices that are happening right now. What kind of evolutionary system are we allowing that favors psychopathy, wholesale psychopathy at the top of our systems? And mind you, most governments have a revolving door with the corporate sector. So 1 year, this kind of people would be working at Goldman Sachs or some other corporate or another banking firm or investment firm, and next year they would be managing Greece or the dismantlement of Greece for that matter. So, secession. The concept of secession is that you are, well, as an example from the United States, you're Texas, you don't like the union anymore, and you say, I want out. There is a potential for corporate secession in our society. The worst example is, of course, China and outsourcing, where a corporation says, well, I don't want to pay any taxes and I go and settle myself in Dubai or in another tax haven like the Netherlands, put my offices over there, go and Dubai or go to China and completely don't pay any taxes for local governments. This has horrible consequences for governments who have high expenditures, who have, well, entitlements, people have pensions, people getting older. There's some sort of welfare infrastructure in most countries, and the consequence of secession, of corporate secession, is a dismantlement of the state system we have. We right now live in a pretty peculiar state system if you look at it historically. It's something completely new, the kind of societies and states we have right now. States have been very powerful. If states lose their power, it would translate to a vastly reduced standard of living for most people. The extreme example of this, process, is the sea steading, where corporations go into the sea or some other contrived islands. The sinking islands in the Pacific might be a great example. They settle their means of construction over there, fully automated, as Martin Ford has made clear potentially. They import goods, they export products, and they are beholden in rules and in taxes to no one. So, a scene from Second Life, for those of you aware of it, you can construct your own little object over there. Those cubes over there are blocks representing $1 billion. I made a little garbage can over there, completely connected with money, and that says something about the concept of money. So when corporations succeed, you end up with the artifact of money which we have right now. Well, as you may know, most countries in the Western world have enormous tax or state debts. I believe the state debt of the United States as of this year is $17,000 billion. But that's nothing compared to the number of liabilities, the amount of liabilities in the United States, which is well in excess of $100 billion. That includes pensions, that includes medical liabilities, that it includes the debts that the United States collectively, consumers and society, all of it, has agreed to. So someone has to pay for those debts. This is clearly fiction. Even in the European Union, the monetary system we're in is completely broken. It is going to collapse. Doubling rates, exponential growth. You don't notice it for a very long time, and it goes up. And then, after a few critical doubling rates at the end, it's like 25% of the whole system, then it's 50% of the whole system, and it's 100% system, and then you have a breaking point. We didn't notice what was happening, what started happening since the 1970s. For those of you who know, it has something to do with the Nixon and disassociating our monetary system from the gold standard. But the end result is a breaking point. And we are years away from that breaking point. America is completely unsustainable. Most of Europe is unsustainable. Our financial system is shattering within a matter of years. So, a scene from the movie The Matrix, one of my favorites, I will use this movie several times, is the question, where do we go from here? Well, many people might have become completely disillusioned by the system we're in. You say, well, I'm going to a farm, I'm going to buy some land, and I'm going to secede from this consumerism. In Dutch, the word is consuminderen, is consuming less. Or you might become a prepper and say, well, I anticipate the collapse of society in some format, and I am going to prepare myself, and I'm going to become completely independent, well, probably with some guns as well, and a well-stocked fridge of some sort. But the question is, can we dissociate ourselves from consumerism? Can we dissociate ourselves from all this society, of this complexity? Or even better, can we dissociate ourselves from this technology? Well, there's a major problem with that. Once an appreciable number of people do in fact break their machines, their hold on the machines, the system itself stops functioning. Why? Because money is based on debt. So all the money we have is banking, by the banking system we have, is based on that. If people don't pay back into the system, they don't consume, they don't take part in the system, the current system, the breakage of this current system is only accelerated. In the movie The Matrix, the chairman is discussing with Neo, can we break our machines? It was about a specific scene in the movie where they were inhabiting a city completely filled with machines. There was no nature there. There was no reserve. If they broke the machines, they would literally suffocate. They would starve, they wouldn't have food, they wouldn't have any service whatsoever. We are increasingly moving to a society where everything we do is determined by machines. So, in essence, whatever delusions we might have, there is no going back. Or, well, the alternative might be a global favela, a global minimalist state of minimalist consumerism and just basic survival. But who is going to grow our food in that system? There's going to be a very small number of very rich people and an enormous mass of extremely poor people. And there's no reason to assume that it won't happen in Europe as well. So, a very brief look at human nature, at human constraint, human weakness, human frailty. This is who we are, the good and the bad. We have Geergens, who exposes himself to the elements, and who is able to survive under extreme duress and extreme circumstances, probably one of the most extreme examples of a human being surviving in the wild. Then another example, you may guess why I used that example, it isn't too flattering. Same thing as Geergens, but in a context of extreme poverty and extreme dependence and poverty. These people have nothing left. They live in a garbage belt. So what is the end result? The end result is that charming, smiling guy over there, is probably in Sudan or Afghanistan, who is completely desperate and pushed into some form of terrorism. This is the real face of destitution, of giving up hope, of despair, having no alternative. There is another example from the movie The Road. If you have the opportunity to watch it, please do. If you want to be depressed for a few days, please watch the movie The Road. It is about a complete collapse of society. Everything is taken from us. Nothing is left behind. People resort to cannibalism. No services, no government, no state, nothing. Not even food. People resort to cannibalism. That's the worst case scenario. Well, I shall not comment on the last picture. Reality. This is what it comes down to. If we surrender this serenity of the 20th century of civilization, this brief interlude in a horrible time, do we want to return back to a system which was, or a societal model which is based on these extremes? So, what is the alternative? Well, in the 1980s, there is an ideology or a movement which calls itself transhumanism. Well, they clearly needed a slogan, they clearly needed a word to describe themselves, but they might have been born from a progress, a hopeful thinking. They might look at the past, they might have looked at the past and say, well, we certainly don't want it. What else do we want? The ideal which they formulated is, well, let's become something better then. Maybe we can use the technologies. Maybe in some appreciable amount of time we can change the human state in something fundamentally better. The ideal of transhumanism, well, it might be real and it might not be real. I believe that aspects of transhumanism will become possible, but not in the narrative science fiction idealized manner that is currently being presented by the transhumanists right now. There are several technologies which are emerging, which will allow humans to do things which were currently impossible for humans. You are able to do transhumanist things already using your mobile phone. What you're doing with your smartphone right now would have been magic 10 or 15 years ago. If you continue along this line of progress, if you keep extrapolating along this line of progress, at some point we will enter up into magical realms. Now, what is the combination? Think back to the second slide. What is the combination of all poverty, pervasive poverty society, the services of a state being dismantled, maybe even total collapse, while at the same time technology keeps progressing in little bubbles all across the world. Technology won't stop. Even if you have total collapse, there will still be progress. But that may be the worst combination. Human desperation and rapidly advancing technologies. Remember, we're still living in a world of nuclear weapons. Right now we have 3 means of mass destruction. Chemical, biological, and nuclear. I can add a few more if you like. Nanotechnological, robotical. Technology won't stop. Transhumanism, however, offers us a way out. It is a narrative, it is an idea, but it is a credible idea. The most important part of transhumanism, as far as I'm concerned, is giving people a better way to reflect upon themselves, give themselves more meaning. I will come back to you in a moment. However, there is a problem with a lot of these technologies emerging. And the great destabilizer is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence has the potential to completely get out of hand. Martin made clear how it will get out of hand. It will destroy human value indirectly. It makes sense, actually. If I would have a choice, and I would have access to artificial intelligence, I would love to work less. But the system we're in does not favor, it does not allow us to work less. We're caught in a capitalist system which rewards investment and which punishes not taking part in the system. That's a self-reinforcing and self-amplifying mechanism. Artificial intelligence is something that is owned. Artificial intelligence is, in many cases, it's an IP, it's an intellectual property, it's a patent. So someone paid for the research, so someone owns it. If artificial intelligence keeps favoring a very small amount of people and completely disenfranchising a large number of other people, the problem will escalate and will cause some sort of collapse in the current system. What comes next, I don't know. I think it's very difficult to say, and it's mostly random. But it can get even worse. Artificial intelligence has an interesting feature. It gets better and better over time. At some point, well, I might call it different than artificial intelligence. I might call it artificial problem solving, a machine that literally solves problems. What if a machine is able to solve problems in its own engineering or its own software? Well, then we enter up into a very new historical situation called recursive self-improvement. If the moment an artificial intelligence is able to recursively self-improve, it becomes functionally smarter. This point might happen in our very lifetime. Early estimates of this take-off point for machine intelligence improving itself is somewhere in the 2020s. And late estimates in the field, well, some people say somewhere maybe in 1,000 years, but late estimates in the transhumanist or singularity field come down to 2040s, 2050s. Now let's look at the implications of that. Somewhere in the next 40 or 50 years, we will have intelligence which is greater than human intelligence. Arguably, plausibly, probable, I don't know. But there are very strong arguments for it. Why would this progress stop? The progress already right now is continuing without any constraint, regardless of economic crisis. There's even a point to be made that in a moment of economic crisis, progress heats up. It gets faster, because people are looking for new ways to open up new markets. The end point is something we will call the singularity. Singularity is just a word. It's just an image. It's a marketing slogan. Don't think it has any meaning on reality. These pictures have nothing to do with the singularity. I added them because I don't know what to add. It's just interesting pictures. That's Coruscant, Star Wars. It's a planet covered by one city. Over there, that's an abstract landscape. What do I know? What will happen the moment when intelligence, machine intelligence, or maybe enhanced human intelligence exceeds human intelligence? Or even worse, when all machine intelligence, or one machine intelligence, is bigger than all of human intelligence. Extrapolations in Moore's law position this point somewhere around 2040, 2050. So the essence of my message is that somewhere around 2050, there will be machine intelligence or thinking processes which are fundamentally better to do anything, perform any task, better than all of humanity combined. That is clearly ridiculous. But it is the kind of extrapolation we're talking about. That's the end of history in some form. You cannot believe the amount of hostility with some people when I bring this message. They say, well, we have to stop it. Well, how do you want to stop progress? How would you want to rescind from progress? How would you want to dissociate yourself from capitalism without dying, or without billions of people in the third world dying? We're stuck in this treadmill. There's almost no going back. It's like we painted ourselves into a sort of an existential corner. Some people in this field become unbridled optimistic when you present the concept of singularity to them. When you say, well, singularity is going to be amazing progress, it's going to be faster than anything, they say, well, it's some kind of present. They start talking in sort of eschatological terms, as if it is some kind of spiritual end promise to human history. And they talk in terms of if it is a present. When singularity comes, we come to our presence. Well, I call that kind of thinking a Santa-larity. It is more like Santa Claus than anything else. It's more like worldwide Christmas forever. However, the problem with singularity is it is a roll of the dice. A singularity can be anything. A singularity is just a moment in history when the values we have in society get amplified, the dominant values in society get amplified into almost infinity from a human perspective. So if right now Richard Fuld is in charge of the singularity, then we're screwed, literally. Then a lot of people, well, arguably are going to die. If Mossad, or maybe some element in the Russian Duma, or the NSA, or the Chinese State Party, or even North Korea are in charge of the singularity, we're probably not much better off as well. I have hope that maybe someday something like a singularity might be initiated by Google. Well, at least they say they don't want to be evil. But we don't know what's going to happen. The singularity is not a promise, it's not a blank check. It is a process, it is a mechanism, and it can have features and morphologies which are beyond our control. So what is the best thing we can do? I would naively say, take the values we like, and we can agree upon, democracy being one, and perpetuate them into our bedrock of society. Well, clearly, as my first 10 slides have been showing, we are not doing that. We're doing exactly the opposite right now, worldwide, of what might arguably or maybe or potentially produce a positive singularity, if such a thing is possible in the first place. So, then I would, well, ask you to take part in a little bit of audience participation. Right now, seen from the Matrix, right now there is a company called Google, and they are investing heavily in a product, and they gave it a brand name, sort of a brand name called Calico. Google is investing in life extension. Most of you are in their 30s and maybe 40s, maybe 50s in some cases. You are going to live, if nothing happens, for another 30 or 40 or 50 years, and then you are going to be dead. So your part in life and history of this planet has ended. However, just bear with me, as sort of an experimental thought, what if Google Calico would produce results? You could ignore those results. You say, I want no part in life extension, I don't want to take that pill. But what if it produces results in the next 5 years? What if the result, the research of Google Calico works, it's tested, it's approved, and 5 years from now you have a pill. If you take the pill, you're, well, maybe a year, and you are back into your 20s. Your body is back into your 20s. Your mind is still as advanced and as sophisticated as it is right now, probably a little more. You're fresh, you're young, but you also have to live with the consequences of being maybe living to a life of a few centuries. You have to take part in such a future. This is a thought experiment. Right now, people don't care about the future. And you see the same pattern over in every country where people get of a certain average lifespan, of a certain average age. The older they get, the more disinterested in the future they get. It's really bad in Europe. It's pretty bad in Japan as well. They don't want to think about the future. They don't want to think about long-term consequences. They just want to live their life in peace, be left alone. If you are offered that choice, you don't have to take it. If you want to go, don't slam the door on the way out. But if you have the choice and could live a few centuries, you have to think about the world 200 years, 300 years from now, potentially. So that's my prime message. If you have any questions, now's the time.
Are there any questions? Sorry?
No, let me say it very clearly. Google Calico is research being done by Google. They are probably going to crowdsource it, and they're going to use their databases to find ways to make us live longer. The result of Google might be a few years extra in my lifetime. So maybe they have amazing research, I live 10 years longer on average. Instead of 80, I become 90. Well, with my lifestyle, I might become 60, then I might become 75. So I have no expectation that Google will actually work. But there might be a chance it does work. They aim high. Google research aims very high. So if it works and we get a century, or if the singularity occurs and we get like 20 years or 30 years or 50 years extra, then it means that you have to make choices right now about the way we organize society. Choices not based on complete apathy or electoral disinterest or self-interest or psychopathic selfishness. Consequences about the collective world we're in right now. Right now we are not making these choices as a society. Nobody gives a damn, clearly. Capitalists most of all, they just think in very short term. Politicians think in electoral cycles, maybe 4 or 5 years. Look at the way the climate is going. Look at the way the resources are depleted. Most resources have a refresh rate of 10 years or something. Aluminium, right now the amount of worldwide aluminium is like 15 or 20 years. Oil is completely irrecoverable in 2030. Our society stops functioning very quickly if you put it out into the future. There might be technological solutions, but like I made clear, those technological solutions only favor the rich. Well, we know the end result of that. It's certainly not democracy. We want to live in that world. Well, if you're going to live for 20 or 30 more years, probably who cares? You got your pension and then you got your clean way out. But that's not the world that would be ideal, as far as I'm concerned. So a glimmer of hope? No, it's a call to action.
I was just wondering about your take on AI, artificial intelligence. Do you really think that it is possible to get computers that will actually function the same way as human mind? I mean, you're familiar with Searle's Chinese room argument?
Yeah, I know the argument of, that's why I say you don't need AI, you don't need like a sophisticated conversationalist, poetry reading, or a tasteful AI that can function like data and engage in witty conversation. You don't need it. I said artificial problem solving. And there are ways to get to AI, many ways, there's many ways, roads leading to Rome, to get to some sort of system that solves problems. It might be pretty inhuman. The end result. It might not even, we might have a singularity where the thing just does not communicate with humans, but it takes over some control, or it completely escalates, and there's still no AI in the classical sense. You don't need a human analog intelligence to completely escalate these technologies. That's my first point. The second point of AI, the singularity can also be reached by amplifying human intelligence. So there are many destabilizing potential. You might grow a brain from a human, might alter it, and then you end up with some sort of human-derived AI. There's even another possibility. You scan humans. There's a lot of research being done right now in brain plastination and scanning. You take the brain, the human brain, you scan it, you slice it, and then you reproduce it in some sort of virtual substrate. We might not even understand intelligence, but there's still a simulation of a human going on. Well, of course, I agree with you, this is pretty hypothetical. But the ways in which we achieve highly destabilizing problem-solving mechanisms or machines or systems is, well, there are many possibilities for this to explode. Yeah, AI as a human simulated philosophical entertaining concept. Sure, it's a possibility, but it isn't necessary to completely wreck our society.
I have one more question about the singularity. I once interviewed Ray Kurzweil, one of the main proponents of the singularity movement. And what I never really understand is why the singularity is inevitable. You say the same. You say there will be a singularity, but we don't know yet how it will look like. Why is it inevitable?
Well, when I get this question, or variant of this question, I always give the same answer. What if we could conduct an experiment where we take, maybe with time travel or whatever, we were able to conduct a sort of a thought experiment where we have 100 Earths, all the same, and we let them develop in a unique manner, and we just wait what happens. My estimate, and it's just like sucking my thumb, it's just a personal estimate, is that 60% would have a singularity somewhere in this century, 40% would not, and of the singularities that would occur, the majority of singularities would be bad for humanity in some form or another, maybe for all of humanity or for a sizable percentage of humanity. And that's again emphasizing the point that singularity is not clear. You might not even notice a singularity. In a rare few instances, there might be a singularity and nothing would happen. Something happened and then it went away.
Why talk about it then?
Well, the majority of cases is if a singularity happens, it is the fastest moving amount of compound change in history in a very short amount of time. It is a technological development. What does a mind think? What does a mind conclude? What does a mind produce that thinks smarter than humans? Chimpanzees are fairly good at solving problems, but clearly humans are better at solving problems and creating them. Humans change the environment they live in. They are driven by motivations, by their subconscious, by their needs, by their urgencies. And AI would be the same. It would have values, it would have needs, it would perceive the future in some way. It would create models. And an AI would decide upon courses of action which we as humans would not be able to do. Whether or not it is a human AI, or whether or not it's a completely non-human entity of some sort, it would start changing its environment according to its values. And, well, my point is that anything can happen, so we better make sure that it is the kind of AI embedded in the kind of world which we favor. A ruthless world might very well produce a very ruthless AI.
Okay, there aren't any more questions. Thank you, Khannea. Thank you for this talk.